Hello and welcome to another video from Devon Pond Plants. Today we're going to talk to you about top 10 tips for buying and planting plants in your pond. And if you want to know any more about the subject or about anything to do with ponds in general, by the time you see this video you should be able to get my book. It's called Ponds, a practical guide to design, construction and planting, and it's available through my website or through the usual channels, Amazon and so on. So my number one tip today is when you're buying plants, please be careful when you're getting gifts from neighbours, friends and relatives. People are often very generous giving away garden plants, but one of the problems that can happen is that you get unwanted hitchhikers with your plants. I'm just going to show you an example. This is Elodea. It's actually Elodea naturalia. A lot of people call this Canadian pondweed. There's many species, many of which look just the same, and this was widely sold in the aquatic trade up till about 6 or 7 years ago, and it's present in very many wild ponds, streams, rivers all around the country. It's not the devil incarnate. It does quite a good job of oxygenating, but it is extremely vigorous. And once you've got it in your pond, it's extremely difficult to get rid of. And it's the sort of thing that can easily pop out of a pot that didn't appear to have any in if you accept it from neighbours and friends. So my number one tip is, if you do accept gifts from friends, don't put them straight in your pond, but grow them in a little container for a while and make sure there's not anything unexpected growing in the pot.
Tip number 2. Most plants are highly seasonal and only look their best at certain times of year. So when you're planting your pond, try to choose plants that look good at different times of year. For example, the obvious well-known spring flowering plant is marsh marigold, now obviously clearly looking past its best. And your white skunk cabbage and lesser spearwort. All of them by this time of the year, which is September, really won't look very good at all. For mid-season plants, you would definitely want to include some irises, the best flowering plant for May. You might choose some mint, you might choose some loosestrife, which carries on flowering almost till now. You might choose some cotton grass with its fluffy seed heads. You might choose flowering rush, which also by now is looking far from good. For late season, a good example is pickerelweed with its beautiful blue spikes. You might choose anemopsis or apache beads, which has a lovely beautiful white flower quite late on in the year, and it has attractive red stems. And don't forget that a lot of interest can come simply just from foliage, so I always like to include some simple sedges like carnation sedge or Carrick's Bowls golden sedge, and there is actually one evergreen, or only very few evergreens. This is stripe rush, Baumia. And don't forget, if you bog garden is lacking a bit of interest, Six Caesar or Devil's Spit scabious is a lovely one to include for late season flowering. Tip number 3. If you're buying, for example, 15 plants for your pond, try not to buy 15 different plants. Buy in small multiples, say 3 of each type, especially the tall slender ones like zebra rush or flowering rush, and plant them in small groups. You might want to consider buying a few specimen plants in larger pot sizes. This one is Golden Club and it is quite slow growing, so it's quite a good idea to buy a big one to start with. This one is umbrella grass, and then your loosestrife again. And that gives you quite a balanced a more balanced arrangement. Tip 4. When you're repotting your plants, or indeed planting for the first time, do use one of the larger size baskets. For example, a 5 litre basket or a 3.5 litre basket, or maybe even a 10 litre basket for very large plants. This will give them greater stability and make for faster growth and avoid the need for repotting too soon. Most aquatic plants are sold in mesh pots, which is indeed the right pot to repot it into. The reason is that the roots can migrate outside of the pot through the holes and absorb nutrients from the pond water and the soil. The only thing is that some plants actually start shooting very quickly from the pot, and in the case of this plant it's definitely ready time to repot it. When you do, you'll have to remove all these shoots and they're then lost. So keep an eye on your pot and repot it before it gets to this stage. Tip number 5, do use professional aquatic compost for planting. This is a good consistency for aquatic plants. You can also use good quality garden soil. Don't use the top few layers with leaves and roots and weeds, and don't use the subsoil. But this is our local Devon farm soil with some of the larger stones taken out. And don't use what our subsoil's like, or any subsoil that's too far down and really not the quite the right medium for your pond plants. Don't also use the sludge that's already in your pond.
Tip number 6. When you're making a new pond, it can be very tempting to go and find some frog spawn, frogs, tadpoles, newts, that sort of thing, from around your local area, from other ponds and so on. Please don't do this. There's a very good reason for that, and that is that there are quite a few unpleasant diseases and problems that can be carried from one place to another. Particularly with amphibians, there's a very nasty virus that affects frogs and toads in some areas, but isn't yet present in other areas. So you could be unwittingly removing them from one place and causing a problem in another. All these animals will be probably present in your garden already, or if they're not, they'll be very close by and they will colonize your pond very quickly. So please just be patient and allow the local wildlife to find your pond on their own.
Tip number 7. When you're repotting your plants or planting them for the first time in your pond, do, if you can bear to, cut them right back hard. This will make the plant more stable in the pot and it will encourage roots and shoots to start growing. You will often get a lot of younger growth from the bottom of the pot. It also might, if you're lucky, give you a second flush of flowers. Tip number 8. Try to include a lot of surface cover in your pond. This can be through water lilies or water hawthorn with the floating leaves, could be fringed lily, could be a little bit of frogbit. And also remember to include, if you can, some of the rafting plants. This one's marsh cinquefoil or Potentilla palustris, and it will grow out from the margins across the surface of the water, giving shade and protection for aquatic insects, and also it will help reduce algae problems and blanket weed. Another good rafting plant is bogbean or Menianthes trifoliata. And one of our very favourites is amphibious bistorte. This is a rather skinny example, but it is an excellent plant for providing surface cover.
Tip number 9. Plants can't just be forgotten about the moment they've been planted. Things change rapidly and the natural order is for the more vigorous plants to start taking over and for the weaker plants to disappear. And I've got a couple of examples here from off the nursery. This used to be a pot full of anagallis, bog pimpernel, and a seedling of Primula florendi has somehow managed to seed itself in there, and pretty soon that one seedling will take over this pot and you will lose the original plant and end up with a different plant entirely. And that's absolutely fine if you like the look of the Primula just as much as the Anagallis, but sometimes you rather like the original plant and you will have lost it. Likewise here, this variegated forget-me-not is quite a weak plant, quite difficult to keep going, and a small Gunnera perpensa has seeded itself in the pot and will very soon muscle out the forget-me-not, and that will just disappear completely. So keep an eye on the plants, keep an eye on what's going on, and it stands repeating, Ruth has mentioned this before, but if you have plants that grow with their new shoots coming out through the sides of the pot like this, don't leave it until they're all coming out of the pot before repotting it, because this is all the freshest, youngest material. This will produce the best flowers and the best growth, and the material in the middle becomes unproductive and woody. So if you cut all this off to repot it, you'll be cutting off all the best material and ending up with all the oldest material. So keep an eye on your plants and keep refreshing them. Tip number 10. Keep your pond reasonably tidy and free from dead plant material as far as is possible. Live plant material is very good, it's removing nutrients from the pond, but when this material starts to die off, as it does at the end of the season, you need to cut off all of this excess material before it goes into the pond, rots away and adds to the nutrient levels in the pond. You can see where this plant has previously been cut off the previous winter, and that's really roughly where you should cut it off again. Normally just above water level. So if the water level in this case for this plant would have been about here, you would just cut off the stems to be just above water level. And the thinking behind that is that water then doesn't get down the hollow stems and rot the plant from inside the stems, which it wouldn't normally get into.